I'm Danica Lorer, and this is Lit Happens, your celebration of the literary arts in Saskatchewan. Today I'm very pleased to welcome Lisa Bird-Wilson with her book, Just Pretending, and a new book on the way. So Lisa, welcome to Lit Happens.
Thank you.
So can you tell me a little bit about what started you out as a writer?
That's a good question. I think I wrote as a kid, like lots of writers did. You know what, when I was 10, I won an essay contest and I was really embarrassed by my essay because I didn't feel like it was very good. And so I kind of like destroyed it and burnt it and got rid of it and nearly set my aspirations to be a writer aside. But you know, I just kept writing poetry, really bad poetry as a teenager, all of that, kind of the usual kind of thing. But, and I did a lot of stories, but at some point, I think I had the concept that a writer was somebody who was born with it, born with a gift, right? So I thought writing was a bit of magic, and that was why I wasn't finishing my stories, because I wasn't gifted and I didn't have that magic. And then at some point I just realized, okay, you know what? Writing is just hard work. You just have to put in the hours and do the work. So
your first book, Just Pretending, when did that come out?
Came out in 2013.
And tell me a little bit about that book.
I probably worked on those stories, so it's a collection of short stories. Probably worked on those stories over a period of maybe 7 to 10 years. So it took a long time to generate them all. I started working on the stories. I was working on a full-length novel was my first project that I thought I would take on, which is actually pretty ambitious, I realized. But I thought I knew where that book was going. And then about halfway through, I realized what was going to happen was if I finished that book, I would go and look for a publisher, and the publisher, I would have no publishing history. So I decided, okay, I'm going to set that aside for now. I'm going to write short stories and I'm going to try to get them published in literary journals so that, you know, I'll have a publishing history when I go to a publisher. And I just got caught up in that. And I love the short story genre. I love writing short stories. They just, you know, they just make sense to me. I love reading short stories. So I just got caught up in that and ran with it.
Well, I remember seeing one of my favorite storytellers in Canada walking around passing out copies of your book, and Richard Van Camp.
Yeah.
He loves this book, and
awesome.
so you've had some really good support from the writing community, and you've also been recognized by the Saskatchewan Book Awards.
Right, yeah. Yeah, in 2014, the book was nominated for 5 awards, and was a great night, like just wonderful, because it took home 4 of those awards, so it was really great.
Wow, and I've read the book, and I've really enjoyed the stories and the characters. So, what were some of the inspirations for the stories in that book?
You know, there's a lot of personal kind of basis in some of the stories, but I mean, you know, you wouldn't want to draw a line between the story and my life, because that's also not accurate. But there's stories, you know, related to family, growing up. I noticed after I wrote the whole collection, there's a lot of young narrators, so I'm probably working out something from from those teenage years. It's about relationships in families, parents and children, how that develops, yeah.
And your collection of poetry, now you said you started writing poetry at a very young age, and so had you always thought you would put together a collection of poetry?
Never, no, that was not, that wasn't on the radar. I think there were a whole bunch of things that happened that led up to that book of poetry and that whole collection sort of coalescing as a book. So the poetry has a lot to do with reflecting and looking at photos, documents, different things around residential schools, because my family members went to residential school. So I have sort of that history and that interest in looking at those photos from that time. And also then it kind of, the scope of that became broader, and I started to look at like the time of treaties being signed, looking at archival documents, lots of archival photos, maps. I visited the archives in Ottawa and sort of physically, you know, spent time with those files and different things from the school. So all of that, and I went to the TRC events, you know, there's just and at some point the details became really, really important. And, you know, I found myself poring over those pictures with a magnifying glass and really looking at what was going on in those photos and documents, and poetry just seemed the way to do that, although literally I knew nothing about poetry. Like nothing. I had no idea in terms of, you know, structure, and I tried to do some self-educating stuff and took some workshops. And so once I had a really solid collection of material, I applied for and was accepted to a mentorship through the Writers Guild of Saskatchewan, and I worked with Elizabeth Phillips, and that was just amazing. Like, it was such a good learning experience for me. So that's when everything kind of seemed to come together.
And so, tell me a little bit about the collection of poems. How many poems are in the collection, and what's it called?
It's 80 pages. It's called The Red Files. And when I told my son that title, he laughed and he said it sounded like a cliche or whatever. And then I felt really bad. But the reason we called it The Red Files, we had a hard time coming up with a title. My first title was, of course, really long and unwieldy and not great. And so I worked with the publisher to come up with a title. And what we did was we looked at the archives in Ottawa. When you do research in residential schools, that it's fairly complicated because because of the way the filing systems worked, and there was just so much material that needed to be filed and documented. But some of the early files are separated into categories. There were the black files, and then there were the red files, and it's just a filing system. But, you know, to me, I found the red files to be sort of an ironic. You know, it was a chance name that was given to this series of files, and yet I just found it sort of ironic. So we talked about that a little bit, and my publisher thought that was a good title. So,
and so there's a string of historical basis in the poems, and are there also links to your own family in the poetry as well?
There are. So there's some poems that talk about, you know, there's one poem called Descended from Daybird. So that's talking about an ancestor and a descendant, and so that's kind of, there's a lot of connection there. And I really feel like when I was, you know, I did a lot of this work. They're not all residential school poems, but a lot of them are, and that's where it started. That was kind of the basis of it, and then it just kind of went from there. But I really feel like I had my mushums and cookums and aunties and uncles in mind as I was looking at those documents, and, you know, really sort of formulating the poems and coming up with the material.
Well, Lisa, it sounds like an amazing book. I can't wait to read it. So where are your books available?
McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. I believe I did see this one in Indigo, Amazon, online, like the Kobo and the Kindles and the, you know, the different e-readers. I know that they're available that way. The red files, I've sort of seen it all over the place. So I think that publisher has a big sort of a marketing machine going on and sending my book out. So that's kind of nice.
Thank you, Lisa. Our guest today has been Lisa Bird Wilson. This has been Lit Happens. You can find past episodes on Shaw TV's YouTube channel. My name is Danica Lorer. You can contact me at danicalorer@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching.